Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Critical Weight Theory. And today we've got a bit of a special episode because, I'm trying to branch out and have a diversity of content. I'm really delving into different topics. So today we're talking about an unfair advantage, what happens when a lawyer is too good. It's a little bit of a strange topic because I'm not a legal expert, I'm not a lawyer. In fact, I've never been, uh, facing a lawsuit myself or anything like that. I've never started a lawsuit, although I've had a few moments in life where maybe I could have either faced one or started one. But one thing I can say is that I did serve on a federal grand jury for 18 months, so I mean, that doesn't make me a legal expert, but I was a part of the legal process, so I have a little bit more perspective after that than I previously would have had. So, for about 18 months of my life, I traveled 100 miles away once a month, and I sat in a courtroom and we looked at many different cases. And I can't talk about the specifics of any of the cases, but we decided if there was enough evidence to pursue any charges against various people. And in that process, I learned a little bit more about how courtrooms work. I mean, I couldn't help but learn a little more because I was actually there, as part of the the way that the cases would go forward. So I was pretty directly involved because of that. So even though I'm not really an expert, I've had some hands on experience in looking at the actual evidence of cases. And, you know, I got an idea of what kind of cases could be pursued. I've learned that it's indeed true that usually a prosecutor won't go forward on a case unless there is some solid evidence. That's not to say it's always that way, but in a lot of in a lot of cases that's how it is. And usually they pursue more than one charge, and that's partly because they don't want to get a case to trial and just have the entire case thrown out because it only had one charge and the judge is like, well, this is not what we're going to pursue, and they just throw the case out. So usually there's more than one charge. Like if it's a drug case or something, they'll usually also um, pursue it if there's some additional crime that happens, for example. Although of course sometimes it might be just that they charge them with one or two things, but often they want to get them for multiple things, so it's a stronger case. So you might learn about that on television, and indeed that is how a lot of these things are done. And some cases will be stronger than others. In some moments, a witness might even recant their testimony or something like that, or they might just decide, well, we need more time to go forward with this case. And well, that's me setting the stage for the episode to give you an idea that I've actually had a little bit of experience with this. So, it, in this episode, just imagine that a lawyer is so good, so unbeatable that their involvement guarantees victory in court, or seemingly guarantees victory. In that scenario, what should the justice system do to ensure fairness, So, I'm going to explore this fascinating intersection of legal ethics, fairness, and the principles of justice. So, there are two principles of justice that I'm mainly going to highlight here. One is the right to effective legal representation. We hear about that quite a lot. And of course, you got the good old fairness and equality before the law, which is actually related to the right to effective legal representation. So, more about the hypothetical scenario. So, to explain the premise, I'll just say that the justice system is built on the assumption that legal outcomes should be determined by the facts and the law, not by who has the better lawyer. But what happens when one lawyer is so extraordinary that their skill creates an inherent imbalance, or seemingly does? I suppose that that is something that's not going to perfectly be understood, like, because maybe some lawyer who seems like a bumbling idiot might have a good day or something, and they'll actually outwit the genius lawyer or something like that. But at the end of the day, let's face it, there are some superstar attorneys out there who really would seem like they have maybe an undue advantage even. So this is not a it's not just a crazy scenario. It's something that I think courtrooms actually do have to deal with. So, there could be some real world examples. Lawyers known for profile wins, or maybe seemingly unprecedented skill. I've thrown around the word seemingly a lot here because a lot is due to perception. It's potentially tricky to prove some of these things. I suppose you could look at the lawyer's actual record and draw conclusions from it, maybe as scientifically as possible or whatever. But at the end of the day, I think we're a little bit dealing with assumptions here as well. So I think it introduces a challenge of balancing individual rights with systemic fairness, and you don't want to you don't want to sort of vilify a lawyer who's just being competent at their job either. So there's sort of a balancing act that you would have to have in order to provide for fairness in a scenario like this. So I've narrowed this down to five basic approaches to the issue. So approach one, I've written down equal access to skilled representation. You could expand access through government funded legal aid or subsidies for top lawyers to represent underprivileged clients. It would give everyone a fair shot in court regardless of their bank account. So that is one possibility. And maybe that actually happens. I don't know. Like I said, I'm no expert on this, but that seems like an avenue to explore. And, maybe more should be focused on it. And approach two is to regulate case acceptance. So we could limit caseloads or impose ethical restrictions on dominant lawyers. Should there be rules preventing one lawyer from dominating an entire sector of cases? To me, that seems like a pretty valid question. You know, it's just like the idea of preventing a monopoly in the business world. At a certain point, if the stranglehold is too strong, and you have people who are dominating any given field, it it becomes a matter of is this a just scenario? Is this actually how things should be, and could it lead to some unjust outcomes? Like, would people just start sort of handing victories to that lawyer based on their reputation or whatever? I think that could be a real life scenario. It may have happened already in the history of the law. I would imagine that maybe it has. So approach three would be to promote legal skills across the profession. Boy, I turned that one into a tongue twister, even though it actually wasn't one. But anyway, continue legal education and mentorship programs to raise the overall standard of representation. So, what if the best lawyers helped train the rest of the profession, ensuring a more level playing field? So maybe a lot of lawyers wouldn't even have the time to do that. I don't know, but it seems like maybe that should be a requirement. Even I know they probably already face plenty of requirements and it'd probably be annoying, but to me it makes sense to sort of spread the knowledge and the uh, skills, the skill base to help make sure that there are more qualified lawyers out there. Approach 4: judicial oversight and safeguards. Enhanced scrutiny on these things would matter. You could have neutral experts to counterbalance dominant lawyers. Independent voices could help ensure that no single lawyer's skill tips the scales of justice. That I'm not sure exactly how that would go, but it's an idea. I think it could be applied. Approach 5: ethical obligations and pro bono work. So, how about we require elite lawyers to take on pro bono cases? And if you don't know what pro bono means, that basically just means free cases. You don't charge a client. And that means that sometimes if if you're not a rich person, you might have a skilled lawyer to take your case. And that could be quite a difference in the outcome of a trial if you're not going to lose the case just because you don't have a lot of, you know, well, you don't have a fat wallet, you know. So the Michigan bar has a quote. It's said that a lawyer should render public interest legal service, and sure enough, I agree with that. So the Michigan bar actually already advocates that to some degree. So I'm not saying that none of these things happen already, but maybe they should be emphasized a little bit more so there are more legitimate outcomes in trials and it's not just based on how much money is in a person's bank account. And of course, there can be more systemic reforms. There's something called an inquisitorial system, so you could increase the elements of that, shift some responsibility to judges for a more balanced process. Now, I'm not 100% sure if that is the absolute best idea, but it's an idea to have judges, more involved. You could also or allocate resources differently, provide additional resources to the opposing party when one side hires a top tier lawyer. How about that idea? I think there's something to that. So so I just want to remind you what the core tension is here. It's the idea that everyone should have the right to the best lawyer, and not just the best lawyer they can afford, but the best lawyer that is available. So, the other premise, the part of that really matters is that you have a level playing field so you can have a more just verdict based on the evidence and not the the class system. So I think there is a need for ethical, procedural, and systemic adjustments to these courtroom procedures, and I encourage listeners to think about how these principles apply in their own communities and legal systems. It's not just the courtroom where these ideas can apply. Like, what about just outcomes in different avenues of life? Like I mentioned the business world earlier, and business has a lot to do with the law. In the first place, you know, private property is protected by the legal system, for example. The basic nature of the economy is a global legal system at this point. So all of these things kind of tie into each other. And that's why I guess, this is sort of an important issue, as important as any other one that I might discuss here, because who couldn't end up in a courtroom and, facing some of these very questions. So anyway, the question of fairness in the legal system isn't just hypothetical. It's a real challenge in courts around the world. Balancing individual rights and systemic justice will always require careful thought and continuous reform. And, you know, that's if we want courtrooms to be fair, and we don't just want everything to fall apart. I mean, that's really one of the main points of having a courtroom, or at least it should be the main point, is to ensure that there is some protection of individual rights and some form of valid justice that can happen. And if that's not happening anywhere, then you know what? We need to find a better way of doing things. It's really that simple. So it's really an important issue, and I'm sure that in future episodes of this podcast, I'll explore other ethical dilemmas, like should judges wear robes that reflect their political uh, biases or something like that. The way that NASCAR does. Like, should they wear robes that tell people that they were appointed by such and such a person, or whatever. Like, it's the same question that you have about politicians in general. Like, should they be compelled to wear a corporate logo on their suit if they were sponsored by a corporation or a super PAC or whatever? I think that they should be forced to wear those things. I know that they say, well, that might that might make the process biased against the judge. But you know what? If they want to remove those biases, then they should remove those sponsors. I almost said respoon, but remove those, those political appointments. I think possibly one of the best approaches to this issue is to just have public funding of politicians and make it so that judges are not appointed by, you know, one party or another. It's 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 a tough issue, I'm sure, for some people to understand, but I that's my approach to it anyway. So, all right, have a nice day, and hopefully this provided food for thought.